Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Amstrad, get real, get Amstrad.
Yesterday, we told you about Europe's moves to curb Islamic radicalism. The rules that have been proposed to train imams and regulate funding. Tonight, we tell you why the Roman Catholic Church, with its headquarters in Europe, also need urgent regulation. A global scandal has come to light. Thousands of cases of sex abuse by priests. In most cases, instead of being punished, these men were promoted. They have been accused of years of molestation and rape. Successive popes have known about the rot and they've all brushed it under the carpet because the reputation of the church is more important than the safety and security of its followers. Now, all of this has blown in the Vatican's face. Some investigations have begun, but they're all behind closed doors. Can the world trust the Roman Catholic Church to act against its own top officials, whom it has protected for decades? On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you specific cases. Also on the show, India will regulate online platforms. The government's announcement has triggered a debate. We tell you why it's the need of the hour. And India is far from being the first country to do this. Ethiopia's conflict worsens under the watch of its president, who won a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing warring factions together. The fighting triggers a mass exodus. In Denmark, 17 million mink are being culled over fears that they may be carriers of the Wuhan virus. The government apologizes for the move, but says it's necessary. And $56 billion worth of sales, 583,000 orders per second. Singles Day sales break all records in China. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Reports say India and China have agreed to a three-phase disengagement plan along the line of actual control, which would include China moving back to its position beyond the finger point and significant troop reduction along the bank of Pangong Tso Lake. Hong Kong's pro-democracy lawmakers have said they will resign to mark their protest to the disqualification of 4 opposition members from its legislature. The disqualification came shortly after China's parliament adopted a resolution allowing Hong Kong's executive to expel legislators deemed to be supporting Hong Kong independence. The Indian government is in talks with Pfizer and BioNTech for their potential vaccine against coronavirus, which is 90% effective. Pfizer spokesperson confirms the news, saying the company is in talks with the Indian government to sell the vaccine in India. Several roadblocks remain, as Pfizer does not have a distribution pact so far with any Indian company. Russia claims that its Sputnik V vaccine is 92% effective at protecting people from COVID-19, according to interim trial results based on data from the first 16,000 trial participants. Russia registered Sputnik V for public use in August, even before the approval to start the large-scale trial, which was carried out in September. Political crisis grips Peru after the country's Congress head Manuel Merino assumed presidency, following the impeachment of President Martin Vizcarra. Thousands of protesters hit the streets demanding the return of Vizcarra, who remains a popular figure despite falling short of a parliamentary majority. Police fired tear gas to disperse the demonstrators, who refused to back down. Dozens of protesters were later detained. Bahrain's Prince Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa has died at the age of 84. The prince was one of the world's longest-serving prime ministers who led his island nation's government for decades. He had been receiving treatment at the Mayo Clinic Hospital in the US. Official mourning has been announced for a week, during which flags will be flown at half-mast. Mexican police used firearms to demonstrators in Cancun who had taken to the streets to express their anger over the death of a young woman. A video on social media showed demonstrators trying to tear down plywood at the entrance of an office building, and volleys of the semi-automatic gunfire sent them running for cover. At least 2 journalists were injured during the protests. It was not immediately clear if the gunshots during the protests were live fire, rubber bullets, or blanks. The United States has recorded over 200,000 cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. This is the highest number of cases any country has recorded in a single day since the start of the pandemic. Meanwhile, President-elect Joe Biden has said Trump's failure to concede defeat in the U.S. election is an embarrassment and that nothing will stop the transfer of power. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hit back, saying that there will be a smooth transition of power, but to a second term under Donald Trump. The West Indies cricket team has effectively been put under house arrest for a few days after breaching COVID-19 protocols in New Zealand. The Windies landed in Christchurch on 31st October and the squad was split into 2 separate bubbles of 20 each, but allowed to train as they completed their isolation in a government-approved hotel. However, players from the 2 bubbles were seen mingling in hallways and also sharing meals. The team has consequently been barred from all activity until the quarantine period ends on Friday. World cycling body UCI has banned Dutch rider Dylan Groenewegen for 9 months for causing the crash that sent Fabio Jakobsen into coma at the Tour of Poland earlier this year. Groenewegen was found to have deviated from his line and collided with Jakobsen near the finish line on August 5th. Jakobsen spent a week in intensive care and had surgeries to reconstruct his jaw and face, and later said he was lucky to be alive. Groenewegen also suffered a broken collarbone and has accepted the verdict.
Tonight I'm going to tell you about a global scandal. It is about the Vatican and its predator priests. For years now we have heard about and read about this, dismissed it as a remote story. But abusive Catholic priests are everywhere. And I'm not making a sweeping statement. I have 3 stories to share with you. The Catholic Church in England and Wales ignored close to 3,000 cases of child sex abuse. 3,000, you heard that right. In America, the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C. sexually abused minors. And in France, an ambassador of the Vatican molested 4 men. It does not end there. Over the course of the next 10 minutes, we will describe the extent of the crisis in the church, how countries across the world have reported cases of sexual abuse against priests, and how a wall of secrecy protects these predators. This is our cover story tonight. Let me start with the most damning report that has come from the UK. This is about Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the head of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales. He is being accused of hiding paedophile priests. The United Kingdom conducted an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. That report is out, and the details are shocking. The inquiry looked into complaints from 1970, in fact, to 2015. And in this period, the church received more than 3,000 complaints. 3,000 complaints of child sexual abuse in the UK. The complaints were against more than 900 individuals connected to the church. More than 1,750 victims and complainants were involved. What did the church do? It brushed all these complaints under the carpet. In fact, they covered up the entire scandal. When someone complained against a priest, They would move the priest to another parish without any supervision, without any probe or corrective measures. Some of these priests continued to prey on children. And in all these years, the Archbishop did nothing, including Cardinal Vincent Nichols. He inherited this problem from his predecessors. He did nothing to fix it. Instead, he became a part of it. He tried to suppress new cases. The inquiry found that since 2016, more than 100 allegations of abuse have been reported. What did Pope Francis do about this? Again, nothing. Yes, the Pope too was aware of what was going on in the UK. Reports say Pope Francis asked Cardinal Vincent Nichols to stay on, despite a report that criticized the Cardinal's leadership. The findings were clear as water. The Church was prioritizing its reputation over protecting children. And the Pope looked the other way. What's worse is that this is not a one-off case. The same story repeats in different countries with different priests. Let me tell you our second story. It's about a disgraced former cardinal. The Archbishop of Washington, Theodore E. McCarrick. He molested a 16-year-old way back in 1971. That case was covered up. And instead of being punished, this cardinal was promoted. Did the Vatican not know about his abusive ways? Of course they did. Pope John Paul II, the previous pope, gave him a promotion even when there were persistent complaints against McCarrick. Pope Francis faces the same charge. But in 2018, he ordered an investigation against McCarrick, a welcome step, but a much delayed one. This probe came more than 45 years after the first case of abuse and more than 2 decades after the first complaint.
The McCarrick report is remarkable because it points to failings by a succession of popes, particularly John Paul II and Benedict XVI, who allowed McCarrick, along with Vatican officials, to rise through the ranks of the Church in the United States, despite the fact that there were consistent rumors that he had practiced sexual misconduct with adult seminarians.
The Vatican's dirty linen is being washed in public now. Let's bring you case number 3. It's of a former ambassador of the Pope to France, Archbishop Luigi Ventura. 4 men have accused him of sexual assault. A trial has kicked off in Paris without the accused. That's right. The Archbishop is not present in the trial against him. Apparently, it's too dangerous for him to travel from Rome to Paris because of the Wuhan virus. The Archbishop's lawyers produced a doctor's note in his defense. The trial has begun without him. What does the Pope have to say about all this? He spoke out for the first time today. His comments were limited to the McCarrick case. Once again, he pledged to rid the Catholic Church of sexual abuse.
Yesterday, the report on the painful case of ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was published. I renew my closeness to the victims of all abuse, and I renew the efforts of the Church to eradicate this evil.
That's all. The Pope's response is far from adequate. Last year, in America alone, it was found that almost 1,700 priests, 1,700 priests and clergy accused of sex abuse are unsupervised. Now, add the cases from around the world, and the number is staggering. The number of priests accused of sexual abuse. And these revelations are shocking. These are not men of God. These are predators. They should be tried in public by a court of law and not behind a veil of secrecy in the Vatican. And this, by the way, is not limited to America or France or the UK or the Vatican itself. Predator priests have been found in Asia, in Europe, the Americas, even in Africa. The Vatican has received a complaint from almost every major country, including in India. And some of these complaints date back to the 1950s. Our next report tells you the story of the decades-long priest sex abuse scandal that has now hit the Vatican.
For Becky Ioni, an apology from the Catholic Church means nothing.
Apologies don't mean anything if they come with a list of excuses while it was okay. And so I think we need the Church to acknowledge it. We need the Church to punish those involved. and we need the church to make changes. They can't investigate themselves. Any reported abuse, whether it is an adult or a child, should immediately be reported to secular authorities. And it doesn't matter if that person is a cardinal, the Pope, it doesn't matter who that person is. When they abuse someone, they become a criminal, and that needs to be reported.
Becky Ianni represents SNAP, the survivors network of those abused by priests, an organization in America that represents victims of sexual abuse by priests. Collectives like SNAP have now opened worldwide because sexual abuse in the church is a global problem. From towns in Australia to schools in Ireland, major cities of the United States, and even churches in India. There is an avalanche of sexual abuse charges against the Catholic Church. A wall of silence has protected the pedophile priests for years. Some accusations date back to the 1950s. The abuse went largely unreported in those years. But since the dawn of the 21st century, the Catholic Church has been fighting off allegations from almost all major countries. This includes India. Last year, an investigation by the Associated Press revealed shocking details. There is a long history of powerful priests abusing nuns, with some accounts going back to the 1990s. Nuns across India have complained about unwanted sexual advances, even rape, with the Catholic hierarchy failing to protect the victims. The Vatican has known about the scandals for years, but it has done little to stop the abuse. In some instances, it actively fought back the idea of an investigation by a foreign agency. In 2014, a United Nations panel criticized the Vatican with a scathing report. It called on the Vatican to remove child abusers from within its ranks and report them to law enforcement. Another demand called on the Vatican to open up the church's archives so that officials who concealed crimes could be punished. In response, a spokesperson of the Holy See criticized the United Nations, calling the report an attempt at interference. In 2019, Pope Francis took a major step. He abolished the policy of secrecy in sexual abuse cases. Church officials are now allowed to share information with law enforcement officials, and it is mandatory for the clergy to report sex abuse. But as recent revelations show, the Vatican needs to do a lot more to clean up its ranks. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Nearly 6 months ago, we asked the Vatican a question. Why does it maintain a jarring silence on China? Pope Francis, for the activist that he is, has not condemned China's persecution of Uyghur Muslims. Forget Muslims. The Pope has not condemned China's persecution of Christians. He has not spoken about the suppression of voices in Hong Kong. Many others have asked these questions since, including US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, but the Vatican has not bothered to answer. Instead, it went ahead and signed a deal, a secret deal with China, not so secret anymore. Why is the Church so keen to please an authoritarian regime? Is it just to have a say in church affairs in China? Is it all about power and access? What about China's atrocities on Christians? The unholy nexus began in 2018. That's when the Vatican and China signed a deal. It gave the Pope a say on the appointment of Chinese bishops. So starting 2018, the Church maintained a stoic silence on China. It reduced itself to a silent spectator of China's crimes. Earlier this year, Beijing launched an assault on Christianity. The Chinese government tore down crosses from China's churches. The Vatican watched silently. In July, China hacked the Vatican. Analysts said multiple high-profile entities associated with the Catholic Church were targeted. What did the Vatican do? It declined to comment. The very same month, Pope Francis also skipped a part of his speech that mentioned Hong Kong's new security law. In September, the Pope skipped his meeting with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Why? Because Pompeo is a vocal critic of China. and the Pope did not want to offend Beijing by meeting him. So while the Vatican recognized Palestine, the Pope refused to help Hong Kong student activists in their democracy movement. Pope Francis called for peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but he did not ask China to conduct itself peacefully in the Taiwan Strait or along the border with India. Pope Francis is called the progressive Pope. He has spoken about everything: refugees, homosexuality, the environment, but he does not have a word to spare when it comes to China's human rights abuses. The Pope has prayed for the people suffering from the Wuhan virus, but he has not questioned the cause of this suffering. He has not questioned its origin. The Vatican was rewarded for casting a blind eye to Chinese crimes. Last month, the Vatican said it has extended its agreement with China for 2 more years. And this time too, the Vatican did not disclose any details. All that it said was that there had been, quote-unquote, good communication and cooperation with China. I'm sure it was good. Well, here's a little prediction. The Vatican's deal is up for renewal in 2022. It's the 11th of November. The Vatican will continue to maintain a jarring silence on China for the next 2 years. In order to have some control over the 6 million odd Catholics in China, the Pope will once again put at stake the Vatican's credibility, the values of Christianity, human rights, and the people's well-being. So from sex abuse to rights abuse, the Church has fallen woefully short in protecting its followers. And talking about protecting interests, China is failing in Pakistan. Most investors think twice before funding projects in Pakistan. Corruption, terrorism, violence, and security concerns make it a deadly destination to put your money in. But China kept pumping money to lay its debt trap. Now that strategy may be backfiring. China's projects in Pakistan have been stalled thanks to rampant corruption and violent attacks. And Prime Minister Imran Khan is now facing heat from the opposition because his own officials are in the dock. Our next report tells you more.
Imran Khan wants to be known as a crusader against corruption, whether it was the sheriffs or the Bhutto Sardaris. Khan has been relentless in his crackdown. But the selected Prime Minister has been selective in his clampdown. Imran Khan hasn't gone after the corrupt officials in his own team with the same enthusiasm. It began with Lieutenant General Asim Salim Bajwa, the pizza general, who still remains the chairman of CPEC. Fresh reports now indicate more dirty hands could be in the mix. 2 advisors of Imran Khan are allegedly beneficiaries of government subsidies. The Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan conducted an inquiry. They found irregularities worth over $1.8 billion of subsidies. They were given to 16 independent power producers. This included Razak Dawood and Nadeem Babar. The same report accuses 2 Chinese companies of inflating their costs to set up coal plants. The same kind of corruption that Imran Khan promised to put a stop to when he took charge. In 2018, when Imran Khan assumed office, he issued an order. Several CPEC projects were put on hold, allegedly over the suspicion of corruption. But since the inner circle of Imran Khan has been named in graft complaints, progress on CPEC has stalled. Violent attacks on Chinese investments and limits on borrowing have added to Islamabad's troubles. Almost a month ago, 14 security personnel were killed in Gwadar, the city where China is building the deepest seaport in the world. The outbreak of the Wuhan virus has caused further delays. The pandemic is hurting Pakistan's plans to build special economic zones with China's help. Reports say Chinese companies are facing production delays. Managing human and material resources is proving to be a struggle, alongside inflated bills. The opposition, faced with a barrage of corruption lawsuits, is now beating down Imran Khan's neck. They accused the Prime Minister of not expediting key infrastructure projects with China. Imran Khan is struggling to get things back on track. It won't come as a surprise if Beijing decides to dial the Pakistani military for help. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
Let's move to a development that everyone in India is talking about. OTT platforms have been brought under the government's control. OTT stands for over-the-top platforms, the likes of Netflix, Hotstar, Amazon Prime Video, Z5. They will now be subject to government censors. Was this needed? How will it change things? What does it mean for the content producers? What does it mean for you, the consumer? Those of you who watch shows, events on these platforms. We'll try to answer all these questions. First, what is the news? In India, online platforms are now subject to government regulation. They will be regulated by India's I&B, or Information and Broadcasting Ministry. Question number 2. Do the new regulations only apply to OTT platforms? No, they don't. They also apply to online news platforms, social media platforms, and current affairs content on online platforms. Question number 3. Was online content not regulated before? There was no law or autonomous body to govern digital content in India. In September 17, OTT players signed a code to govern content on their platform. But that was self-regulation. Question number 4. How does the rest of the world do it? What are the rules? We have a list. In Singapore, OTT platforms are controlled by the country's media regulatory body. They prescribe do's and don'ts for service providers. In Australia, OTT platforms are governed by the Broadcasting Services Act of 1992. In the United Kingdom, authorities plan to scrutinize online content. They're looking to set up a regulator. In Kenya, too, authorities are talking about a regulatory mechanism. So this is not a first, and India is not alone in trying to regulate content online. But like all government decisions, this too has been criticized by some, and that's the beauty of a democracy. You could say everything is debated. So let's discuss the criticism. Is government regulation of online content the need of the hour? Yes, it is. And to answer that, let me first share some numbers with you. Indians are consuming online content more than ever before. There are 17 crore plus OTT platform users in India. A survey conducted in 2019 found that 55% of respondents prefer to consume content on OTT platforms. 70% of the respondents consume this content on mobile phones. Only 41% said that they prefer DTH or direct-to-home television. Estimates say video streaming will become a 4,000 crore rupee market in India by 2025. How can such an enormous market remain unregulated? There are other reasons why regulation is needed. To create a level playing field. Print and broadcast media in India is regulated. There are specific laws in place. The Information Technology Act of 2000, the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, and the Cable Television Networks Regulation Act 1995. Plus, there are self-regulatory bodies. Channels are mandated to not show dead bodies on air, for example, not show alcohol or people smoking. In recent times, of course, some media have crossed this line, but most try to abide by the norms. For online platforms, no such rules exist. They self-certify their content, which is why we say a level playing field is needed. At the end of the day, TV, print and online are all creating content. Why should some be bound by rules and others have a free run? Which brings us to movies too, and the old headliner, the censor board. It regulates and certifies movies that release in theatres. But there's no such third-party certification for films released online. So here's a question. Do consumers not deserve responsibly produced content, even after paying a hefty subscription fee? As for fears of misuse and government overreach, that's always the fear, and that can be said for all laws. Regulation is a double-edged sword. You can't do away with it. You can't do away with laws for the fear of them being misused. Last year, it was around this time that Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed won the Nobel Peace Prize. After 16 years of deadlock, he negotiated a peace deal with neighboring Eritrea. At home, he introduced far-reaching reforms. Today, he is ordering airstrikes on his own people. Under his watch, Ethiopia is standing on the brink of a civil war. So you can add this Prime Minister to the list of Nobel laureates who ended up committing or defending unspeakable crimes.
550 rebels killed. More than 6,000 people forced to flee. A defiant, power-hungry regional power and a prime minister promising outright victory. At what point does the conflict in Tigray qualify as a civil war? It could be very soon. Prime Minister Abiy has recalled retired generals and soldiers. He has ordered airstrikes in Tigray. Abiy's relationship with the regional leadership has always been strained. It reached a tipping point last week. Tigray's ruling party attacked federal troops. In response, Abiy ordered an all-out offensive. There are reports of heavy fighting in Tigray. But news is becoming increasingly difficult to gather. There is a complete communications blackout. Internet, phone lines and electricity have been cut. Journalists are being arrested. The government is attempting to control the narrative of this war, a reversal of Abiy's early reforms that earned him a Nobel Peace Prize. So how long will this war drag on? The Prime Minister feels he's on the verge of victory. On Monday, the scenes in the border town of Dansha reflected his optimism.
Our military safeguards our nation and keeps us united. While we were living peacefully together, they attacked our defense force. We were hurt by that and our people were killed.
But not everyone in Tigray shares this feeling. Prime Minister Abiy hails from the Oromo ethnic group, the largest in Ethiopia. Historically, the Oromos and Tigrayans have been rivals. This war may reignite that rivalry. To the south, another fault line is opening up, the Amharas. They have a long-standing dispute with Tigray over land. When Abiy announced the war, the Amharas gave their full support. Thousands of Amhara fighters are now deployed in Tigray.
I surrendered to the army because we must not go to war for false reasons. We should be defending our national unity and guarding it. So the young men of Tigray region should not go to war.
Prime Minister Abiy has promised that Ethiopia will not descend into chaos. But the African community is worried. Both the United Nations and the African Union have called for a ceasefire. A civil war in Ethiopia could destabilize the whole region. Thousands are fleeing to Sudan, forcing the country to reinforce its border. Whether this conflict spirals into a civil war or not depends on one factor: the people of Tigray. If they shift their loyalty to the federal government, the war could draw to an early close. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
It's Singles' Day in China, a day that celebrates singles, an opposite of sorts of Valentine's Day, you could say. It's also the country's biggest shopping festival. This year, all eyes were on the Chinese consumers. How would they respond and how would they spend in the middle of the Wuhan virus pandemic? Well, now we have an answer for you. They spent $56 billion on shopping. That is the same amount that Australia spent on its stimulus package this year. So what does the spending spree mean? And is it likely to sustain through the year? Here's a report.
There's shopping, crazy shopping, and shopping on steroids. Singles' Day in China is exactly that. It's an unofficial holiday that celebrates people who are single. An anti-Valentine's Day, if you will. Singles' Day in China falls on the 11th of November. The Chinese spend the day shopping online. In recent years, e-retailers have capitalized on the craze. Particularly one e-retailer, Alibaba. It regularly rakes in tens of billions of dollars on Singles Day. But this year was different. After all, 2020 is pandemic year. Alibaba shattered all previous records. By Wednesday morning, its sales had exceeded $56 billion, compared to $38 billion last year. At one point, it was receiving 583,000 orders per second. Its rival JD.com also reported $30 billion in sales. So, what changed? Why are people spending more during a pandemic? It's difficult to pinpoint an exact reason. A survey by Oliver Wyman Group found that 86% of Chinese shoppers were willing to spend more, or at least the same amount as last year.
As for this year, we cannot say if the pandemic impacts shopping. I, however, have more disinfectant and alcohol in my shopping cart. No other big changes.
This year's Singles Day wasn't just about snapping up a good bargain. It was a barometer of China's economic recovery, a test of consumers' confidence. So, what's the verdict? E-retailers in China don't offer a breakup of their sales. So, it's impossible to know whether customers bought more foreign or local goods. But analysts say foreign goods may have fared better. Since international travel has been shut for most part of the year, this year's Singles Day also had a political shadow over it. Alibaba founder Jack Ma is losing favor with Beijing. The IPO of his Ant Group was blocked by Chinese regulators. Despite his standoff with the regime, Alibaba is doing extremely well this shopping season. The Chinese consumers just want a good deal. They are not swayed by Beijing's politics. Another highlight of this year's Singles Day was live streaming. Normally, Alibaba hosts a mega gala to mark the shopping festival. The star quotient is pretty high. In 2015, Daniel Craig attended the event. Last year, it was Taylor Swift. This time, Katy Perry made a virtual appearance. China's retail sales are down 7% in 2020. A Singles Day of shopping frenzy cannot bail out Chinese companies. Customers have opened their purse strings on Singles Day. But the question is, will this momentum sustain through the rest of 2020? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Mink are famous for their fur. They're now emerging as potential carriers of the Wuhan virus. Denmark is the world's biggest producer of mink fur. It has decided to cull 17 million mink. Close to 3 million have already been culled. Farmers have questioned the need for the move. The Danish Prime Minister has apologized. The problem is not limited to Denmark, though. Outbreaks in mink farms have been reported in 6 countries. Here's a report.
These animals find themselves dominating global headlines. Mink, found in Europe and America, are farmed for their fur. They are now being seen as a potential risk for the spread of the Wuhan virus. Outbreaks have been reported in mink farms in 6 countries: the Netherlands, Denmark, Spain, Sweden, Italy, and the United States. But why are these mink farms emerging as hotbeds? Reports say densely packed conditions on the farms provide favorable conditions. This could mean that the virus gets amplified in ways that could help it mutate, and which is why governments are considering tough measures. Denmark last week decided to cull all of its 17 million mink. The fear is that a mutated coronavirus strain could jump to human beings. This could mean that the virus would bypass Wuhan virus vaccines. Some 2.85 million mink have already been culled in Denmark. After they are culled, the mink are buried in layers of lime. Denmark is the world's biggest producer of mink fur. More than 1 in 5 farms in the country have reported infections. The Danish Prime Minister has now apologized for the mass mink culling. The Danish government has admitted that there was no legal basis for the mass culling. The fur industry has questioned the science behind the decision. Opposition parties say the culling should not have been started before plans for compensation were put in place. The Danish Veterinary and Food Administration apologized to mink farmers in a letter but said it still recommended the culling. The United States is watching the developments in Denmark very closely. Since August, more than 15,000 mink in the United States have died due to the Wuhan virus. US officials say they do not plan to cull the animals and are monitoring the situation in Denmark. Around a dozen farms are being kept under quarantine. In the Netherlands, a study says humans carried the virus onto mink farms. The report published in the journal Science says this led to 68% of fur farm workers and their close associates contracting the infection. The Wuhan virus has also infected cats, dogs, lions and tigers. But experts say mink appear to be the most susceptible animals so far. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In the US, meanwhile, the president has still not accepted election defeat, and headlines on election fraud seem to be the flavor of the season. Now New Zealand has reported it. An election for Bird of the Year has turned murky. Around 1,500 fake votes were cast in favour of the little spotted kiwi. The whole issue has ruffled quite a few feathers, but thankfully the fake votes have been cancelled and voting continues for New Zealand's next Bird of the Year.
This is the little spotted kiwi. It is the smallest bird in the kiwi family. But don't be fooled by its size, because this tiny bird is capable of some truly incredible things, including voter fraud, or at least its supporters are. New Zealand has a tradition of selecting a Bird of the Year. We say select, but it's more of an election. Here's how it works. Each voter can rank 5 birds of their choice. The bird with the most votes is selected as Bird of the Year. The stakes may not be high, but the organizers do not tolerate fraud. It's 1 vote per person, period. This year, more than 35,000 votes have been cast. During counting, officials noticed an irregularity. 1,500 votes were cast from the same IP address. This meant the little spotted kiwi was leading the race for a brief while. But once the fake votes were removed, it dropped down the leaderboard. We know what you must be thinking. All this fuss over a bird, but in New Zealand, this is the norm. Bird of the Year elections can get heated. Endorsements come in from all quarters. Take the hee-hee bird, for example. An adult toy store backed its candidature. Why? Because the hee-hee bird takes more than 1 partner. Bird of the Year elections have always been scandalous, as strange as that may sound. In 2015, 2 teenagers tried to rig the vote in favor of the kokako bird. Again, in 2018, a single person tried to vote more than 300 times. Both efforts failed miserably. A spokesperson for the election summed up the whole episode. The little spotted kiwi is a flagship of New Zealand. It stands for the national values of democracy, fairness and equality. Voter fraud, she says, is not the Kiwi way. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Kids might not be able to meet Santa in person this year due to the Wuhan virus, but a London-based entertainment company has created an app. The app, Santa HQ, will ensure that virtual meetups can take place in the hope that kids get a chance to meet Father Christmas online. Here's a report.
For over 25 years, Ministry of Fun has been training Santas.
Welcome to the Ministry of Fun Santa School 2020!
They have now created an application called Santa HQ. In the build-up to Christmas, this application will bring kids face-to-face with Santa.
I'm not kind of thinking of it as a sort of second best thing at all, because actually children spend a long time looking at iPads and talking to their friends through their smartphones, etc., etc. So actually, for a child, meeting Father Christmas on a screen is actually quite a natural and normal thing. Via their computers and mobile devices.
The trainer, James Lovell, is busy training his Santas on the new digital experience.
Hello, Harry, hello. Hello, Santa.
The Santas are practicing making one-to-one video calls. For Santa Ed, the experience is exciting.
Excellent work, Santa Colin. Textbook Santa work there.
This is the first time, actually, and I'm actually finding it really, really exciting. I feel very positive about what's going to be happening. I mean, I've heard some rumours going around that Christmas is cancelled, but I say on my left boot, it's not cancelled this year. We're still going to go ahead with things.
The app is backed by internet entrepreneur and founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales. He says children need something joyful to look forward to.
And this idea came to me that, wow, children probably shouldn't visit Santa's grottos this year because of the coronavirus, but yet it's been a tough year, it's been a hard year for everyone. We still need Christmas. Children need something joyful to look forward to. So started thinking and working on, okay, let's do virtual Santa, and looked all around the world for partners and found Ministry of Fun and Prism, and they, built this amazing app experience.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Very nice. Give yourselves a round of applause. Very good.
The 32 days worth of activities and a Santa meet costs £30. For a world hit by coronavirus and ensuing lockdowns, the joy of Christmas is needed more than ever.
What's that, Santa? That's the reindeer. They're hungry. I can't stay on too long.
Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas.
I think that's a good note to end on. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.